Not many of us have the opportunity to grow up in a school with 150 years of history. Not many schools in Canada, for that matter, can boast being as old as the country it was built in. And not many of us have the chance to walk in the footsteps of our parents, our grandparents, and even our great-grandparents. But this is the case for many of the young women who walk the halls of St. Mary's Academy. In this Catholic Focus, we'll talk about the impact this school has had on the wider Manitoban community and continues to have today.
If I were to pick one word to describe St. Mary's, it would be spirit. There's a spirit of community, there's a spirit of service, and all of those things kind of combine together to produce a really great opportunity for learning in an environment in which girls can thrive.
I would describe the school as welcoming because as soon as you walk in the door, you automatically feel comfortable, and every person here is always going to welcome you in and ask you if you need help or anything.
The thing that has stuck with me is a sense of drive and purpose. St. Mary's has a way of instilling a particular spirit about the community that it kind of ingrains into all of the different aspects of education, and it has driven me forward through my career.
They were established by the United Nations.
The teachers here will always tell you to stay true to yourself because being like somebody else on the media isn't really the smartest way to go. You know, if you're trying to achieve your goals, it's better to work hard and achieve them yourself rather than doing what other people would tell you to do.
St. Mary's Academy is an all-girls school. Nearly 600 young women enroll each year between grades 7 and 12. 65% of students are Catholic. Many of them are from families with a tradition of attending the academy. We sat with Connie Unick, St. Mary's president and student alumna. So Connie, we're in one of the classrooms in St. Mary's Academy. Thanks a lot for welcoming us into the school. And it's great to be here because there's a long history here. So what is it that marked you as a student here at St. Mary's?
That's a really, really good question. When I was in grade 9 here, which was like a few years ago, just across the street, there was a Shriners Hospital, and we used to do a service learning time there. And I would go there like I think every Wednesday and play with the children there. And I just remember it being such an amazingly wonderful, joyful experience for the children to see a younger person come in and walk in and play with them. That stuck with me. And I thought, you know what, to be of service to others, to serve with kindness and generosity, those are like pillars of an education here. And I thank the sisters for that.
St. Mary's Academy is part of a network of schools under the direction of the Sisters of the Holy Names of Jesus and Mary all over the world. And until 2014, the school was led by them. Although the sisters are no longer directly involved in running the school, they are still present and offer guidance. In fact, Connie became the first lay woman to assume its leadership. She benefited from the wisdom of Sisters Susan Joachim and Mary Gorman, former directors of the school. So what was that like for you to come in to that role?
Well, you know, when I first took on this position about 4 years ago, almost exactly to the day, I just felt blessed to have been given this opportunity to serve the women that were so influential in influencing me as a young girl. I've been part of this school since I was in grade 7, and that was in 1972. I graduated from the school, and I believe I think my math class was in this classroom when I was a student here, in senior high. So this school, its values has played a big part in my life, and I felt like I was giving back to the women that so influenced me in such a positive way.
I think that when I got into leadership here, I had all the sisters in all the community behind me and supporting me. And my life was spent in reading spiritual things and theology and going to church, and the church was my life. That's not so much now. So we find people who love the place and are willing to work here and want to work here, but to support them to get the background that just was handed to us really in religious life. And there's no place in Winnipeg really for people to get a higher Catholic education with theology. So that makes it difficult.
I guess related to that, I think it's going to be really difficult to keep the Catholic school Catholic. I think that it's harder and harder even to get priests to come to celebrate Mass. I think it's harder with those who are non-churched, that, when we pray in the morning before school starts, that it's a time of quiet and sacred. I think to hang on to those kind of things to feed the greater Catholicity that we hope will be in their future.
St. Mary's Academy was the first Catholic school in Winnipeg. It was established in 1869 to serve primarily Anglophone Catholics on the west side of the Red River. For most of its existence, St. Mary's has been known as an all-girls school. It's proven to provide security and freedom for the young women and has enabled them to defy stereotypes.
I think it allows us to have the girls as leaders of the school. I think one of my favorite stories is from a former student who graduated in the early 1980s. And when she graduated from St. Mary's, she chose engineering at the university. And there were very few girls in her engineering class at that time. And one of her male classmates next to her said, "Gosh, you took physics in high school? There were no girls in my physics class." And she said to him, "Isn't that strange?" Because she said, "There were no boys in my physics class." So I think that allows the girls the freedom. They don't know that people think maybe that they can't do it.
I think too it's a more fulfilling living of high school years for girls. There's a gentleness, I think. Sometimes it's not always gentle, but there is a gentleness and a kind of a mutual support. And it's an expression of young girls.
What I'd like to think is they come to us as girls, as young girls, but they leave us as women, truly in every sense of the word. And that's because it's a safe place for our girls to come to support themselves, each other as young teenagers, but also to have mentors within the school, our school, whether it's a teacher, whether it's an office, our secretarial staff, whether it's anybody in our school, an adult in our school that they can go to if they need to talk to someone. That's not easy to find. And we truly care about each and every one of them.
St. Mary's is today the oldest operating independent school in Manitoba. For this all-girls school to continue to flourish, Connie and her team at St. Mary's have a great vision for the years ahead.
We do have a long history. We'll be celebrating 150 years next year, but we're going to be here for a long time. We have 5 pillars that guide our decisions over the next 5 years. And the number one, element or pillar of our strategic plan is the identity. How are we going to maintain the culture, the charism, the Sisters of the Holy Names of Jesus and Mary, the charism, the mission that has guided us for so many years. And then academics, because we are a center of academic excellence, we're known for our academic and extracurricular program. What do we have to do to maintain that? How do we shift from, the traditional way of teaching and learning to, teaching and learning the way our students are wired now? Our third pillar is well-being. How are we going to, maintain this place of where students and staff can come and be safe and learn in a safe environment, and have a system to catch them if they need some help. So that's also a big thrust for us. And of course, on the board side, I would say, governance and leadership. I'm not going to be here forever, and nor are some of the leaders in this school. So how are we going to plan strategically for the next leaders? That's just as important. And then finally, stewardship. How are we going to continue to be good stewards of this educational facility that has been part of our landscape for 150 years?
So you can see the cluster of high rises at the corner of Portage and Main, and the one with the blue logo. Well, just in behind those would be the location of the original St. Mary's Academy on Notre Dame East. And then that's the Provencher Bridge, and of course over the bridge would be St. Boniface Cathedral, because this was all part of the Archdiocese of St. Boniface at the time. So the school expanded 3 times on that spot, but it was first established by the Grey Nuns in 1869, 2 years after Confederation. And in May of 1869, they opened the school, and in November of that year, just near the forks, the junction of the Red and Assiniboine, at Fort Garry, Louis Riel seized the fort and set up his provisional government, and then negotiated Manitoba's entry into Confederation. The school was a witness to all those events.
Right. The Grey Nuns, a nursing order, were only temporarily assigned to St. Mary's. The Sisters of the Holy Names of Jesus and Mary, a teaching order from Quebec, took over educational needs in the diocese in 1874 at the request of Bishop Alexandre Antonin Taché of St. Boniface. The school was thriving. At the turn of the 20th century, a new building was acquired to accommodate the growing student population. It opened in 1903 and became known by some as the Castle on the Crescent.
It was the first building here, and it eventually attracted other people to come into this area. But the girls who came here in that first year, there were 148 boarders and only 54 day students. So only 54 girls lived close enough to go back and forth every day. At one time, this was grades 1 to 4th year university. And so it was possible to graduate 3 times or 4 times even, because you could graduate from grade 11 at one time. You could graduate from grade 12, which was also equivalent to 1st year university. You could graduate from the commercial course, either after 11 or after 12, or you could graduate from the college.
Sister Susan Joachim and Sister Mary Gorman were both students at St. Mary's Academy. Sister Susan graduated in 1963 and Sister Mary in 1949. The time they spent at St. Mary's changed the course of their lives. They both joined the Holy Name Sisters, came back to teach, and eventually became directors of the school.
When I first came here as a student in 1960, I had not been brought up Catholic. And so this was my first encounter with sisters, and it was my first encounter with the Catholic Church and the Catholic faith. So I was a little bit in shock because the sisters were still in habit, but I loved it. It was very strict. Those were the olden days, and so it was a lot of silence and a lot of moving out of the ways for the sisters, and very traditional teaching styles, and discipline. But I responded, and after I graduated, 3 years later, I entered the order. I went to Montreal and then came back only in 1974 then to teach. And then in 1976, I became principal. And even by then, in the 10 years that I was away, there was considerable change, because by then it was after Vatican II. And when I was a student, we had only 3 lay teachers. And all the others were sisters who also lived in the building and slept in their classrooms. But when I came back in '74 to teach, already there were more lay people on staff than there were sisters. And I was actually working at that time with many who had been my teacher. And by the time I became principal, there were even fewer sisters.
Well, I'm kind of opposite Sister Susan. We were a very Catholic family, and my mother was a teacher in the schools in Toronto, the separate schools in Toronto, and 3 of her sisters, so Catholic education was part of my life long before I even started school. But when I first came to St. Mary's, it was kind of a natural step from St. Ignatius School, where I had started, to St. Mary's Academy. Almost everybody came. And I was immediately attracted to the gym. Wasn't ever much of a student, but I managed to squeak through. I guess what impressed me when we see the Sister Rita Maureen gym, I was really impressed by the service she gave to the students of St. Mary's. When I look back on it, she had a very poor combination. She was a science teacher, so she had lab prep and very strict convent living, and she would hang out with us kids in the gym and bring us up, smack us down when we needed it. And I thought, she's really doing something good. And I guess it was that attraction of her service and her dedication to young women. I just thought, this is wonderful what she's doing.
Dedication to young women, commitment to the development of the whole person, teaching the value of service, are only some of St. Mary's charisms. They come from the very heart of the mission and identity of the Sisters of the Holy Names of Jesus and Mary, inspired by their foundress, Blessed Marie-Rose du Rocher. Staying true to the Sisters' foundational charisms is so important to St. Mary's that the school has its own director of mission and charism, Sister Michelle Garlinski.
As a Catholic school in the tradition of the Sisters of the Holy Names of Jesus and Mary, we clearly are rooted in the gospel values. And within trying to live these gospel values and educate our students and our community, we also have our charism as Holy Name Sisters. It's education in the faith, especially to those most in need. And in the early 1830s, when Blessed Marie-Rose du Rocher, our foundress, began the community with her companions, the needs in rural Quebec at that time were very different. And so we find ourselves continually needing to evaluate for ourselves, well, what does it mean to educate in the faith today? What is education? Clearly in a school situation, it's much more clear. What does faith mean? and also embracing the fact that we are about hospitality and liberating action for the poor, and really helping our young women to claim their voice as created in the image and likeness of God. And how do they do that? Through their academic rigor? How do they do that in their extracurricular activities? How do they do that in the day-to-day walking of our hallways? Many of our students are challenged in ways and they need our presence. They need us academically to help them learn, but they just need us socially and emotionally. They need us faith-wise. They need to help them to know they're not alone. And so I think it's a great opportunity for me to be able to say, okay, this is the field hospital, as Pope Francis says. I mean, it's a different kind of poverty. It's not the same necessarily economic poverty. And yet I believe there's great value in us walking with our students and our community through this moment in their lives.
How does Blessed Marie Rose du Rocher inspire you?
She inspires me in so many ways. You know, she inspires me because she had vision. She had vision in a time that looked like it was a very oppressive time in society, particularly for those on the margins. She could see possibilities with very little resources. She never let go of that the courage that she had to face the challenging times, knowing that it wasn't going to be easy. She was a woman who faced lots of physical challenges in her own life growing up and limitations. And she didn't allow those to prevent her from being all that God called her to be. She didn't live a long life. She spent more time as a lay woman before she was a religious woman to really get to know the needs of the people. And I really am inspired by that. She was present to the people in her communities. She heard them. She understood what they needed. And I believe that really shaped her ability to very faithfully and very strategically move forward and respond very wholeheartedly to wherever God was calling her.
What is your hope for the future?
I have lots of hopes. I think that my hope, particularly here at St. Mary's, as we continue to journey towards our 150th birthday and beyond, I hope that there will always be this desire within women and within all of humanity to continue to be attentive to God's call, whatever that may be, to serve one another, to just be the best. And whether people leave us being doctors or lawyers, or they work in trades areas, or they're missionaries, that they know that the dignity of who they are is critical, and that they're loved. And we leave the rest up to God.
I think our students who come back and bring their daughters to us, there's a recognition that what they got here was of value. So, and our girls, you know, I pick up the newspaper, and most of the time I can find something wonderful that one of our students is doing someplace, even in the newspaper. So I think our graduates continue to make us so proud, so that gives me hope.
I think too, involvement in the greater church, the diocesan church, that St. Mary's has always been important to the diocese, and I think that we've made a contribution there over the years, and I think we continue to do so today. And I think that as long as there's some links with some Catholicity, it's going to help. I have hope that it will continue.
You mentioned the name St. Mary's Academy to anybody in Winnipeg or outside of Winnipeg, and people know us for that. You know, when we interview prospective students and families, that's in the top 3 of why they want their daughters to come here, why the girls themselves want to come here. It's for the education for sure, because we have a top-notch educational program. We have a very rich extracurricular program. There's something for everybody, but it's because we're a faith-based school. And so if people are asking for a school where faith is practiced, faith formation is practiced, that's really, really important. And to be in a single gender, faith-based school, there's nothing like that experience. I'm a graduate, as I said, from the school. My daughter's a graduate. She's a 2008 graduate. If I'm lucky enough to have granddaughters, they will be here too.
This is the house the sisters built. There are the girls that live in the house the sisters built. That is the nun that wakes up the girls who live in the house the sisters built. This is the bell that rouses the nuns, that wakes the girls who live in the house the sisters built. And it goes on and on. Typical teenage girl stuff in 1894.
Many institutions would say they hope to survive the test of time. For the women who leave this school, it's about more than longevity. The true impact of Catholic education should be seen and felt in the lives of those who have come through the academy. To continue achieving this, the staff and students know the importance of being firmly rooted in its legacy and its faith.